From the heart of Southern Illinois, this is Roots of Leadership. Long-form conversations with the political figures shaping our region. Not just what they do, but who they are and how they got here. This episode is sponsored by the Little Nashville Cafe in downtown Marion, So Ill Cinema, and Swinford Media Group. Senator Bryant, thank you for being on the podcast. Like I told you, this is really more of an overview of not quickly getting to where you're at now, but starting at the beginning and slowly making our way so that people have a better understanding of where you come from, where your values come from, and what led you to the leadership position that you're in. So we'll start at the beginning and tell me everything.
Wow, that'll take a lot more time probably than we have here today, but thanks for having me. I love doing this, just this kind of format. So let me start where I am now, and maybe I'll work my way backwards a little bit and come forward again, if that's okay.
That's perfect.
I'm married to Rick. We've been married for 43 years.
Wow.
We have 2 children, Tyler and Tara, and 6 grandchildren. Great kids, wonderful grandkids. I would say right now that Rick and I are living our best life. And like a lot of people that get married really young, it was a struggle not to stay married, but just to stay alive right at the beginning. Rick's a graduate of Trico. I know you know Trico really well.
Pioneer pride.
Yes. And so going backwards a little bit, I actually went to Trico for part of 7th grade, and all of 8th grade, I was on the first girls basketball team at Trico Middle School. In fact, I'm not even sure if Trico had a girls high school basketball team at that time. It comes up a little bit nowadays because we talk so much about Title IX and girls playing with girls in sports, not boys playing in girls' sports. And it's significant to me because I'm 61 years old, so I'm kind of the generation that watched that Title IX group come together. And at Trico, when we were establishing that first girls basketball team, it was so new for schools to be forced to have those girls teams that Trico was going to make us wear the uniforms that the boys team was discarding because they got new uniforms, until our parents got involved and they're like, no, we're not doing it that way. So we got brand new uniforms that year. We only won one game. We lost a game one time where I was the high scorer with 5. So that gives you some idea of how that went. But that kind of backs me up just a little bit then for me to start kind of where I come from.
Sure.
So my mother married when she was 15,
Wow.
had me when she was 16, had my sister when she was 18. By the time she was about 18 and a half, she was divorced. And so we moved back in with my grandparents. My grandpa was from Willisville.
I was going to say, where was all this?
So all of this happened in East St. Louis,
Okay.
believe it or not. So I would guess when someone asks where am I from, it's hard for me to say where I'm from because I've been from so many places. Seems like we were always moving. My mom, I would say my mom's filled with wanderlust, right? She liked to move around a lot. I think it's because, her parents were very stable, married for almost 60 years. And so she started and finished in the same school district, and she never liked that. So she thought she was doing great by her kids by moving us around a whole lot, So we moved back in with my grandparents in East St. Louis. My grandpa's from Willisville.
Okay.
My grandma's from Ava. And they moved to the Metro East during the Depression, or right after they got married. Like a lot of people from Southern Illinois went to that metropolis of East St. Louis, America's hometown, USA. And so I have one sister that was born there, another sister that was born in Belleville. After my mom and dad divorced, my dad remarried, so there was a second family. We're kind of estranged from them. So I grew up with my grandpa acting really as my father. Wonderful man. He worked 40 years for Illinois Power, supervisor of the Illinois Power Yard, very well known in that area. He was a Republican precinct committeeman in East St. Louis. My grandma worked for Kresge's, which then became Kmart. And my mom only finished the 10th grade, but then went back and got her GED. My dad only finished the 10th grade and went back and got his GED. So I'm the first person in my family, grandparents or parents, that ever graduated from high school.
Wow.
So I take a lot of pride in that, side that my family my whole family kind of pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, became successful individuals in their own right. My dad owned his own insurance adjustment company in the Metro East and then over into Fenton, Missouri. But my grandparents were a really important part of my life because they were really active Christians, evangelical Christians. They instilled a very deep faith in myself and my sisters. My mom is a wonderful person. She made some bad life choices. She'd be the first to admit that. After the divorce, when we moved back in with my grandparents then, my mom was 18 years old with 2 kids, and she was a little wild, so she ended up remarrying at about age 21. She married someone who was very abusive. And I have to tell a little bit of story about my mom and my whole family to really have people understand who I am deeply, because all of this really becomes a part of who I am now as a legislator. So when my mom remarried, she married someone after about 2 weeks who decided they didn't want my sister and I. He didn't want to raise us. But my mom refused to send us back to my grandparents. So the marriage became very abusive, like to the point where I really don't remember as a child, from age 4 to age 9, my mom was married to this man. I don't remember my mother not having a black eye or a busted lip. He knocked out her front teeth. He beat her when she was pregnant, caused her to miscarry a baby. Those were all things that I carry. It's things that I remember the Belleville police showing up at our front door and a police officer asking my mom. So here I am lurking or kind of around the corner as a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old, and a police officer asking my mom what she was doing to cause him to continue to beat her, as if it was her fault, So, we lived that way for a considerable amount of time, and I think anyone who is familiar with domestic violence knows that real often women will continue to take on that domestic violence until it turns from them to their children. And so at age 9, my stepfather was beating me one night, and my mother, to save my life, shot and killed him. So up to this point, I had been introduced, to grandparents raising grandchildren, which we see a lot now. I had been exposed to divorced parents who couldn't get along, fighting constantly in court about who was going to have custody, and then domestic violence to the point where now my mom is a felon. And I was in 4th grade. We lived in the Metro East. My grandparents were upper middle class. So at that, this is 1972, 73. So you have not to make it racial, but you have a white woman during the period of time, which is now known as the White Exodus from East St. Louis, with the Belleville News-Democrat and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, eating up a story where you have this, woman from a upper middle class white family. So of course her picture was on the front page of the newspaper. And at that point, she ended up, just so the listeners will know, because there were no women's shelters back then, we had fled multiple times. He had threatened to kill my grandparents if she ever left again. So in court, she pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was given 5 years probation. If it happened today, she might have been given jail time, because it's still just as bad today as it was back then, but now women have some ability to go to women's shelters and so forth. It's why Rick and I are very supportive of domestic violence centers, because people have to have a place to go.
Now,
so
did you have to testify in any
I
of
did.
that? Or?
And again, I would tell listeners, now we have things like CASA, where you have court-appointed individuals who go in with the children. Back then, you didn't have counseling for children, didn't have a court-appointed attorney. So my memory is of, if you think about those old cop movies where you've got somebody who's being grilled by, a detective, and there's a light hanging over their head and smoke all in the room. So when I go back in my own history and I think about that in that 9-year-old's memory. That's what I think about. It was a judge who was actually a very kind judge, a state's attorney, my mother's attorney, a court stenographer, and me. And, realizing that there was every possibility that my mother was going to go to prison if I were not able to articulate all the things that happened accurately. Gosh. So very early, I became someone who understood that articulating truth matters and articulating in a way that someone else can understand. And I'd been taught by my grandpa, who many of your listeners will know. His name was Bob Hornbostel. My grandparents are the ones that Rick and I built the Bluebell restaurant with on the Ava Blacktop. My grandpa was a man who, if he told you something, you could take that to the bank. And there were two things growing up that you never wanted him to think of you as, or never wanted him to call you, and that was a liar or lazy. So German family, thus the name Hornbostel, right? German family, you work from the minute you get up in the morning till the minute you go to bed at night. So he instilled work ethic in us, and he instilled truth-telling, not just because we're Christians, because I think that's important as well, but because it is the right thing to do. And, a handshake to me is more important than a legal document. If I look you in the eye and I tell you something's going to be a certain way, it's going to be that way. Because my grandpa would roll over in his grave if he knew that, that I hadn't stood good for my word. And so we get through that. My mom gets 5 years of probation. We went through a time period where, we had to move. Couldn't go to that school anymore just because how do you go back to school when your mom's picture has been...
I have a 9-year-old right now, and what you had to go through is just crazy. And I know you to be very tough, and I'm starting to see the origin story here with it. But the idea of, and I have two that are older than 9, but I have one that's 9 years old right now, and he's so innocent and so young, and I'm sorry that happened to you.
Well, thank you. I tell a story. I've spoken at a lot of Christian women's conferences, and I try to share with people that you don't always know what goes on inside someone's household. Everything may appear to be normal, like other than the police being called quite often in our house. I would say we probably were, to the outside world during those years with my stepfather, it might have appeared to be a normal family. But I do tell a very true story. And again, about the importance of people realizing that you can influence children at a very early age. There was a woman named Harriet Farrell from Lansdowne Church of Christ. And anyone who knows East St. Louis will remember Lansdowne Church of Christ. A lot of great leaders of the faith came out of that church. It was on 25th and Waverly. Harriet Farrell gave me a little Bible tract, and on the outside it said Holy Bible. On the inside it actually had the Lord's Prayer. And so probably I wouldn't want to say 5 years old, because I learned how to read really early. I would hide in the corner of that closet, and I memorized the Lord's Prayer with the light that came through the louvers of that closet door, because my stepfather had forbade us from praying anymore. His mother had died of breast cancer when she was very young, leaving 5 children. She had been a Pentecostal preacher, and he was very angry with God. So when my mom and stepfather first got married, my mom would kneel at the end of the bed with my sister Bobby and I and pray with us. And he saw that one night and just said, no more praying in this house. And so my grandparents would come sometimes. We would be allowed to go to church on Easter, but only if he was in a good mood. Because I remember one time we were dressed for church, white patent leather shoes, white gloves, the bonnets we all used to wear. And my grandma showed up to take us to church, and he wouldn't let us go. So very tough years. I use that now to understand what goes on when legislators come and or witnesses come and they're talking about trauma-informed counseling for children. I didn't get that. But I did have a very tight-knit church family and a deep belief in God from a very, very early age. And so I recovered in a way that I think families that don't have Jesus as their North Star would not be able to do. And so I'm able to grasp that. My grandparents were also kind enough in their lives to also take in foster children. So we had foster kids that lived in our home. Now, my mom was always a part of our lives. She always lived with us. But then at times, she had a third child with my stepfather, Tracy. And so by the time of Bob's death, my stepfather, my mom had 3 children, 26 years old with 3 children, and she really wanted to have a life too. And she wanted to get away from the Metro East. So she moved to South Florida, prepared, a place for us to come. So we lived with my grandparents, and then my mom sent for us, and we'd lived there for a little while, and then sometimes money would run out, and we'd all pack up, and everybody moved back to my grandparents again. So we did that for a lot of years until I got close to high school. And then I asked my mom if she could please light for long enough for me to start and finish at the same high school. So I went to high school and a little bit of middle school in South Florida. So I have this Metro East part of me. I have the deep Southern Illinois Trico part of me. I have the real melting pot of South Florida as a part of me. And I really do believe South Florida is the melting pot of the United States. You're getting people from South and Central America. You're getting people from Europe, because a lot of people don't know that Miami is now like the Riviera, the new Riviera, because people in Europe can't really afford to go to the south of France anymore. So they come to Miami. It was only about 25 miles from Miami. And in fact, the menus in Miami are printed at restaurants are printed in English, Spanish, French, and German. Germans love to come to South Florida. So you have this huge influx from Europe, South America, and Central America. I went to a high school that was 50% Jewish, 50% other, 50% white, 50% other. And so when I started my career later in the Department of Corrections, which, I retired from corrections after 20 years, I went to work there as a dietary, but started as entry level in dietary and worked my way up to dietary manager. So I ended up running the kitchen for 5 prisons before I retired. And I became the expert on all religious diets on my own. I did a lot of study on it. But certainly I was the expert on kosher diets because a lot of my friends were Jewish. I've been to a Jewish home where my friend's brother was a rabbi, so went to their home for Passover. So I got to sit in a Passover service led by a rabbi on Passover, right? So I think I want your listeners to know some of these things, because when you become a legislator, you take in to that job all of those things who have made you who you are. Everybody brings something different in. I brought all of this dysfunction as a child. I brought in, some normalcy of being married for 43 years. Rick and I got married in 1981. He was...
So,
yeah, go ahead.
How did you and Rick meet?
Great question. So, going to Trico, Rick's the oldest of 7 kids, all of which went to Trico at some point in their lives. And so we were going, my grandparents had us attending Pleasant Hill Christian Church on the Ava Blacktop, between Ava and Murfreesboro. That was Rick's family's home church. One of Rick's younger sisters was my best friend. And so I hung out at their farm all the time. And I remember the first time I was there, it was the craziest thing with 7 kids, right? And me having kind of a dysfunctional life up until that point. In the same day, my first visit there, one of the kids' pet coons got loose and ate the marigolds off the top of my later mother-in-law's, off the top of her marigolds. The goats got loose and ate the blooms off the rose bushes. The hogs got loose and rooted up her millstone. The turkeys got loose and were up in the tree, and I think you know two of Rick's brothers, Russ and Randy. They're up in the tree trying to get the turkeys down. A couple of the horses got loose and trampled the neighbor's wheat. And I remember standing there and thinking, this is the most fun I've ever had in my whole life, right? So Rick's two brothers actually are closer to me in age. Rick's a little bit more than 5 years older. But he was a guy who was very deep in his faith. I admired him. Not first. At first, I didn't like him. I thought he was a jerk. He was, Rhonda's big brother, and he was a big brother who liked to keep, his siblings kind of under his thumb a little bit. And I thought, this guy's a jerk. But in time, we ended up dating, and to be honest with you, we fell in love via a pen pal relationship. So I would be in Illinois all summer. From the day school was out in Florida, I took the first flight I could get out from the last minute of school, and I didn't go back until the night before school started. And so, every holiday I could come back, Christmas, Thanksgiving. But in the in-between, from the start of 11th grade until I graduated from high school, I bet Rick and I wrote each other 3 or 4 times a day sometimes.
Wow.
And called each other constantly. So it was a very long-distance relationship.
That was back when long-distance phone calls
Oh, my
cost
goodness.
money.
My mother one time, I worked from the time I started working. I lied about my age, said I was 15 when I was actually a couple of weeks before my 15th birthday. I started waiting tables at a restaurant that some people might remember. It was Sambo's, very similar to a Shoney's. Started waiting tables there, worked full-time all through high school. But I remember my mom handed me the phone bill and told me I owed her $240, right? And I had to pay it every dime. Then I didn't ever want my mom to know how much Rick and I were talking, so you had to go to a payphone or even have cell phones. So I'd buy like $100 worth of quarters every time I'd get $100, and we just called each other constantly. And so you really learn a lot about a person when you're writing, as opposed to the, sometimes the lies you can tell when you're dating, when you're just talking to each other. So I turned 18. Well, I graduated from high school in June of 1981. I turned 18 September 20th of 1981, and I got married October 3rd of 1981. And where I was going, I guess I have to back up a little bit, where I was going with this parts of our marriage was we got married in 81. Rick was raising hogs and working a second job. And people who would remember then, he had just bought 80 acres with his dad at 21% interest on a balloon note.
Yikes.
So we couldn't even afford, when we got married, to pay the interest on that balloon note, let alone anything on principal. And the bottom dropped out of hogs. So 50 cents on the dollar. 3 months after we got married, we moved to Tulsa. And we were going to stay for a year and try to get our finances in order. There was a lot of work in Oklahoma. There was a big oil boom while there was a farm bust. And so during the 6 years that we lived in Tulsa, we had our first child, and we were able to pay off or sell off a lot of our farmland, farm equipment, came back 6 years later, and kind of started from zero. So we were married for almost 7 years, and starting where a lot of newlyweds were, at that point. But we had 7 years of really maturing as a married couple in Tulsa. While we were out there, we joined a church that was the largest missions-giving church in the whole state of Oklahoma. So we learned a lot about missions. We were only about an hour from Joplin, Missouri, where Ozark Christian College is located. That church, because Rick and I were really engaged with the youth, they sent us to Ozark quite often to become educated on youth ministry, even though we were never officially youth ministers. So it was just a really blessed time in our lives where God gifted us a whole lot of things that we just wouldn't have had if we would have stayed, say, in Murfreesboro or Ava at that time. So we were able to come back as, I think, a mature married couple. I worked for, a lot of people will remember when Shoney's was in Carbondale. I worked for a franchise company that owned Shoney's and a bunch of other restaurants, and really advanced with that company to the point where I thought, owning a restaurant was something I wanted to do, so we did that with my grandparents. I'm not going to say everything was a bad experience, but you shouldn't go into business with your family, as a lot of people know. Our family recovered, I think, from some of the damage that was done. It was a very successful business, just not a good thing to do as family. Then when I went to work for the Department of Corrections, I was able to take all that knowledge that I had of business and restaurants in particular, use that for the next 20 years, and then to get into the politics of all of this. All during that time, I was a precinct committeeman, carried a lot of water for the party. In fact, I wanted very much to go into politics all of my life, but I thought that my life choices, because I married so young, I had children, I didn't think that that was going to be an option. So I thought, well, I'll just plug in with helping other people get elected. And then some opportunities came up where I want to share a little bit of my testimony, which is that I was in a prayer group with some ladies, and we were reading a passage of scripture. It's in Matthew. It says that you don't get because you don't ask. When you ask with wrong motives. And so I ended up in that prayer group just saying, well, I know what I want. I want to be in politics. Well, somewhere during that time, and I don't know what anybody else's spiritual walk is like, but I don't come from like a church brotherhood where you hear God's voice audibly. Where I wouldn't say that we are what are sometimes termed charismatic church, although I might be termed more of a charismatic believer. But anyway, I had all of these bad, then I left a couple things out that happened in my childhood too. My mother's youngest sister, who I grew up with in all of this, was murdered. Her body was found at Bartlett Cemetery on the Ava Blacktop. It was a murder-suicide from someone that she had been dating. So I have all of these things combined. And I believe that you can ask God why something is happening, not why as if he doesn't have the right for these things to happen. But I was asking why, what am I supposed to do with this stuff? I believe that you walked Joseph of the Old Testament through many, many things specifically to prepare him to have the right attitude. So when he was in Egypt, he was there so then when Canaan was going through a drought, he would be there at exactly the right time to save God's people from that drought and continue that crimson line that goes from Genesis to Matthew to Revelation, right? So clearly you walk through things in your life to prepare you for the next thing, right? So I would say, God, what am I supposed to do with this? And when I worked for corrections, if I had a training going on and we got done early at the academy, I'd go over to the legislature and just sit up in the gallery. Most of the time, like most people who go there, you're sitting up there and you have no clue what's going on. But sometimes Dave Lechtefeld would let me come down and sit with him, and he would kind of explain some stuff that was going on, but I loved it. And I was in the Senate gallery one day when I was just walking out, and I heard audibly, "This is what I prepared you for all of your life." And I remember thinking to myself, okay, like I don't know what just happened, and I know no one else heard it, and I don't care if people believe or not. I know what I know. And so with that, I just thought, okay, well, we'll see, right? Well, later then when I'm meeting with his prayer group and I get a better understanding of that scripture, I was at home, face down in prayer, and I said, Lord, I'm going to ask you for the desire of my heart. And the desire of my heart is to be in the Illinois Senate. I know it doesn't make sense. My family doesn't have money. We don't have much political influence. Like we didn't come from that really. But
to kind of hit pause, you were a precinct committeeman in the Republican Party when it was not.
No, it was just Democrats everywhere.
So the idea of there even being a Republican state senator from this area at the time that you were.
Well, we had Dave Lechtefeld.
True.
And we had Mike Bost, but they were an anomaly to this region. When I was elected to the House, I was surrounded by John Bradley, Brandon Phelps, and Jerry Costello. and I was kind of stuck in the middle. Gary Forby was still in office. Mm-hmm. In fact, quite often, I would hear from someone else, like, that something was going on in the region, and it would be Gary Forby and Brandon Phelps and John Bradley, and I would be like, well, I'm going, right? And I would just show up. And so, yeah, you're right. It was weird, like, to ask for that. But in my prayer, I said, I only want this. I'm asking it because it's the desire of my heart. But I never want to ever walk out of God's will. I feel like I've done that a couple times in my life. Because God will let you force doors open. And when I teach an adult Sunday school class, and I tell my class, it's like when you have your kids at a carnival and you give them that first bag of cotton candy, and they want the second one, mm-hmm. and you tell them no because it'll make you throw up. And then they keep on. So finally you say, I'm going to give them that bag of cotton candy because I know they're going to throw up. And then they throw up. I feel like sometimes in my life, God has let that happen so he could show me that he loves me enough that he said no. And then he's going to let me walk. He doesn't let me walk through it to my death. Let me walk through it to my point of vomiting, right? And so in this, I said, you examine my heart. And if my heart is right in this, then I'm asking you for it, if it's in your will. If it's not, don't let me have it. So that first race that I had with Bill Kilquist, that was at that time, the most expensive legislative race in the history of Illinois. $2.1 million. We spent about $800,000, and the Democrats, because Kilquist was Mike Madigan's handpicked candidate, and they wanted that seat bad because, like I said, and as you pointed out, we were surrounded by Democrats. And so each time, it was so bad in that race that I got up one night because my mind wouldn't stop. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I thought, well, I'll go in the living room and just turn the TV on, get a little white noise. Maybe I can go to sleep. And there was an anti-Terri Bryant ad on there where I was going to join Bruce Rauner's allies and blah, blah, blah. I didn't even have any Bruce Rauner allies, but nonetheless, I remember sitting there and thinking, I can't even get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was wall to wall, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
If I can back you up then.
Yeah.
So you prayed for it. You were kind of looking potentially for a window.
Yeah.
I assume Mike says that he's running for Congress, So what led you then in that window?
That's a great question because I did skip a little bit of that, right? So after I heard this message, I think, from God, and I had that prayer, in my prayer I said, I'll do my part, right? That's how we talk to God. I'll do my part. And so I found out about a program called the Illinois Lincoln Excellence in Public Service Series. It's an organization that's kind of like a boot camp for Republican women. They take a cross-section from all over the state. Most of the Republican women don't look the same, sound the same, think the same. A suburban Republican woman doesn't think like a downstate Republican woman, right? Mm-hmm. But they taught us so much, like fundraising and how to give a speech and what things to look for in a campaign. One specific thing they said was, women generally are not asked to run for office. They have to step up. And they generally don't run for higher office. They do things, and these are very broad strokes I'm using, but generally they will, like a man will wake up one morning and it's not weird for him to say, I think I'll run for 25-year-old guy who says, I think I'll run for Congress. And everybody goes, yeah, right? If a woman did that, they'd be like, wait, what? Like here I carried a lot of water for the Republican Party. And when I said I was going to run for that House seat, everybody's like, well, who does she think she is? Well, I'm like, where have you all been? There were 12 people that were going to run at that point. I'm like, I haven't seen you at anything, right? All those things that run through your mind. So the one thing that they said in this was make sure that you let the person know that is holding that seat, that you want it, because they're usually looking for someone to replace them before they leave office. So I went to Dave Lechtefeld and I went to Mike Bost and I said to them, I'm not nipping at your heels. I'm not a threat to you, because clearly I believe either of those men could have continued in that seat like a Strom Thurmond, right?
Sure,
so they're 100 years old. But I did say, if you decide to leave office, I want you to know that I want to serve in the legislature. And my mind was always the Senate. It's where I always wanted to be. I don't believe in using things as stepping stones, though. So when I committed to run for the House, I was fully committed to run for the House. So anyway, then coming back to your question, so since I had already had this conversation, about 3 days before Mike Bost announced that he was running for Congress, he called me and said, I'm going to run for Congress. I'm not going to run for the House, and I'm going to serve out my term. So there will be probably a very hot primary because it'll be an open seat, but get your ducks in a row if you want to run. So I had about a 3-day jump on some of the other people. And so I'm going to move ahead just a little bit in that. So we had this contentious race. I end up winning by 22 points. All during that race, my husband and I would talk about it, and I would say to him, I'm not worried about what gets said. I'm not worried about how this race unfolds because I'm doing everything. I'm knocking on doors. I'm doing all the things I learned that I have to do. If God wants me in that seat, I'm going to be in that seat. And if he doesn't, my prayer was, don't let me have it if it's not in your will, right? And I was confident about that. So I win the House seat by almost 22 points. Crazy.
The primary or the...
I won the primary by 30 points. It turned out there were 12 candidates initially. But by the time, I said to Mike Bost one time, I said, gosh, there's a lot of people who want to run for state representative. And he said, no, there's a lot of people who want to be state representative. There's not a lot of people who want to run. So by the time the primary actually unfolded and people filed, there were only 2 candidates, one from Jefferson County and me from Jackson County. And at that time, Jackson was kind of the geographic center. So I had a good shot at winning the primary, and I did by about 30 points. In the general, though, I was a bit of a long shot just because Bill Kilquist had, I don't know how many years he served as sheriff, but he'd never lost a race. And I had run 4 times for county board and lost, and 1 time for trustee of my township and lost. Close races every time, but I think of me as a 5-time loser. Right? So I was a little bit of a long shot, but I think our message was good. I think God's hand was in it. About maybe 2 weeks after I won that House seat, Dave Luchtefeld called me and said, I don't think I'm going to run for re-election. Do you want to run for the Senate seat? And I said, Dave, I do someday. And I believe that's God's ultimate plan for me. But the House just spent $1 million or close to it, helping me get elected. And I found out since I got here that nobody knows much when they first get to the legislature. And I'd like to learn this a little bit more before I run for the Senate. And so he said, okay, well, then we're going to look for another candidate, and ended up Paul Schimpf ran. And at that time, I believe maybe Paul was the only person that could have beaten Sheila Simon. So that, I think God's hand was in that as well. So I had a little bit of a spiritual crisis, though, when he asked me, because I thought, well, I prayed for the Senate. Am I not trusting God to get me in the Senate if I stay in the House? And ultimately, I decided that I needed to learn a little bit more, that many times there are things God's walking you through. So fast forward then another 4 years, 6 years actually, it was 6 years, and Paul Schimpf calls me. And Paul Schimpf then is the sitting senator, and he said, hey, I think I'm going to be appointed as a federal judge. I'm not going to run for the Senate again. Do you want to run? And I said, oh, gosh, Paul, let me think about it. Because at that point then, I was being tapped to go into leadership in the House. I had all the committees that I wanted. I was the minority spokesperson, so the ranking Republican on criminal justice, which is the one I really wanted more than anything. So I'm getting to be the spokesperson for that. So then I took a step back, and I'm praying about it, and I'm like, and your listeners that are faithful people will know, then I start like reeling it back and saying, well, when God said that to me, did he mean that his plan was for me to be in the legislature or to be in the Senate? But then I had to take a step, because if I ran for the Senate, then I can't run for the House too. And the House is 2 years. So it meant if I lost that Senate seat, I'd be out of everything, right? So I took a step back and I said, no, I was specific in my prayer, and I prayed for the Senate. So in taking that step back, I said, I'm just going to pull the trigger because it's what I prayed for. God said that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I entered into a Senate race that was an open seat. That doesn't happen very often in Illinois. An open seat where I had no primary.
I was going to ask if anybody had run in primary against you.
Which is weird. And then I had no general election in a seat that the Democrats wanted really bad. And so it was a 2-year term because, sometimes in the Senate it's 2 and sometimes it's 4. That was the end of that map. So the last term happened to be a 2-year term. Then we figure, well, after the 2 years, someone will jump in on the new map. They just don't want to run. So in my spirit, I believe God said to me, you thought you did that all on your own last time, so I'm going to do it again. So we draw for the new map. It's another 2-year term. I drew a 2-4-4. I get no primary and no general in a second 2-year term. So in my spirit, I know that God was saying to me, I'm going to do something awesome, and then you're going to know that this came from me. Now, I don't know how long God will have me serving in the Senate. I don't believe that, that this is my end of my life kind of thing. I think God has lots of things in store for all of us. But last session or the term that I'm in right now is a 4-year term. I had a primary for that one, and it was a very well-funded primary. I don't believe he was a great candidate, but he was very well funded. And so, I don't expect God to give me an entire career of no opponents, nor should I have that kind of a career. But God said specific things to me at the time when that was all unfolding. And so every day that I go to the legislature, I try to keep in mind that I'm not there under my own power. I'm not there under any illusion that I'm awesome. Right, I'm there, but I'm there to bring this lifetime of little snippets of things that God prepared me to do. So when I speak, and I have a Democrat who gets up, who often they'll try to beat up the Republican side and say things like I'm a proponent of Second Amendment, and I've had them say to me many times, well, if you had a tragedy in your life with a firearm, you wouldn't believe the way you do. And I'm able to come back to them and say, no, if there was no firearm in my house, I would be dead instead of the man who is dead. If there was no if my aunt's former boyfriend hadn't have had a firearm, he would have stabbed her to death. He had lots of letters that he left for his suicide notes that, he was bound and determined to kill her. There was an 18-inch butcher knife in his car as well. So had he not shot her to death, he would have stabbed her to death. Right? So I can talk about those kind of things, and I'm not talking about them from a place where it's book knowledge. I'm talking with personal knowledge. And when people come in and talk about trauma-informed treatment for people, I understand why that is necessary. So sometimes as a Republican, I might vote for funding something that might not be 100% like a conservative Republican. But that is because you bring world things to that as well, an understanding of something that's happened in someone else's life. When it comes to foster children, I haven't just seen it. I was taken in by grandparents. Had my grandpa the night my stepfather was shot, fortunately, my grandpa had been an auxiliary police officer. And so the sheriff actually told my grandparents when they got to the apartment, get these kids out of here, because if DCFS shows up, they'll go into the system and you'll never get them back. So we were taken by my grandparents that night and never had to go into foster care. But I watched kids come into our home with a garbage bag with their clothes. And my grandma and grandpa never just used the money that they got from the state for those kids. They always went and bought them brand new clothes, shoes, set them up for school. And then often DCFS would come back in and they'd end up going back to their families again, only to be returned later. My grandma always sent the kids off with a nice little suitcase with all their new clothes and shoes in it, and they'd come back with a garbage bag again because their parents had sold off all of their stuff for drugs or cigarettes or alcohol or whatever it happened to be. Those are things that aren't just in my, they're not just knowledge that I have. They're personal experiences that are in my heart and in my spirit. And those are things that make for good legislators. And they're things that we use in our personal lives as well. So I talked a lot. I'm sorry.
No, that's what I wanted. This isn't about me talking. One to go back, because I've asked everybody this so far. What year did you win boss seat?
2014. And then I was sworn in 2015, about 3 weeks early, because Congress swears their people in on January 6th, I think, 5th or 6th. And the Illinois legislature wasn't swearing us in until like the 12th or 13th. So I went in early enough to serve in lame duck session. Man, there were some votes that were like some crazy votes for somebody that's just coming into the legislature. So, yeah, so 2014, 2015.
So in that race, you've kind of talked about what made you, because it takes a unique mindset to throw yourself out there to be voted on. It's not for everybody, and for those who do it, there's probably a bit of a screw loose somewhere. But
probably
there's a through line with it. But in that race in 2014, when did you ever think, I've got this, or was it election night?
It was election night.
So what was election night then? Because especially as you said you had lost previous stuff. I mean, you're coming off a primary win, but what was election night like in 2014 for you?
It was unique to any other election I've had because, remember, Mike Bost was also running for Congress. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if a lot of people have really focused on this, but Mike Bost was the first Republican to win that congressional seat in the northern half of the district for 70 years. But in the southern half of the district, all the way back to John A. Logan. So it'd been Democrats in that seat for all of that time. And so at election night, I was sharing the venue with Mike Bost. So there's Mike's people are all this Jackson County, so we're both Jackson County folks. And every media outlet in the country was there, Fox News, NBC, CBS, ABC. So I have this awesome picture of like all these boom mics in my face going out nationally. They weren't there because Terri Bryant was running for an Illinois House seat in deep southern Illinois. They were there because Mike Bost was there. But I got, again, going back, it was like almost like the icing, that God gave me some icing on the cake. Mm-hmm. Not only am I going to let you win, but I'm going to let you have all this stuff too. So I've never been able to experience that again. But election night, I had my friends there, my family, my kids, a couple of my grandkids at that point, and just these giant boom mics in your face and asking, how did you do it and all of those things. So it was a little surreal. But I look back on it now and I'm thinking, what an awesome night that was. And here I am, like I told you, I don't have a college degree. I'm very well read. I believe I'm very well educated because I've made it a purpose in my life. I was an AP student all through high school, had planned to go to the Air Force Academy, but I fell in love with Rick when I was 16 years old. And I wasn't going to let anything get in the way of my life with him. So I didn't go back to college until I was 30. And I have enough credits right now to probably get a degree. I've teased SIU a few times and said, can you give me some credit for 20 years in corrections and 10 years in the legislature and all of these other credits that I have, and give me an SIU degree? So now we're kind of looking at it. I might only have to take one class to get a SIU degree, but I challenged John A. Logan. I'm like, that's my school. Why don't you guys graduate me finally? I think I'm lacking one math class and a semester of French after I had 4 years of high school French and some college French, right? But anyhow, I'm looking at that on that night and I'm looking at my mom, and everything that she went through and the struggles that she had trying to raise us as a Christian mother with all the other controversies that went on. My grandparents, I just thought about my grandpa. He'd passed by then and just thought, look at us. look where we are. Anyone who puts their mind to doing the right thing, to speaking truth, to working hard, you can do anything in this country. I didn't have a parent or a grandparent that graduated from high school. And I'm sitting in one of the highest offices in our state. And then beyond that, I spoke, when Trump had the rally in Murfreesboro, I was one of the speakers on the stage at a Trump rally. I was an at-large delegate to the national convention this last time. To be an at-large delegate for the Republican Party, the state convention has to elect you to that. So I was selected out of everybody in Illinois to be an at-large delegate to the national convention, and then going to the Trump inauguration and just experiencing those things. I think about this and I'm thinking, Rick and I are just hardworking people who love our country and love our state, love our children, our grandchildren, love the Lord with all of our hearts. And you can do this by just putting out that effort. Now, that isn't God's plan for everyone. So I think you could walk through a lot of the political steps that I've walked through, and maybe you don't get to that place because that's not what God's plan is for you. But it has been God's plan for me. Now, I wanted to be on the mission field early in my life. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. That wasn't God's plan. But Rick and I have done a bunch of short-term missions trips, and we give very generously to missionaries all over the world. That's a part of God's plan, as we are not rich people, but he's made us financially stable to where we can do a lot of those things. So I would always challenge anyone who's listening to me speak to know that if you put your trust in Jesus Christ, there's nothing that you cannot accomplish that is a part of his will, all the way to the presidency of the United States. Look at Ronald Reagan.
So you win in 14. Tell me about when you got sworn in then.
Oh my goodness. In that first swearing in, I remember my boss told me early on, if I ever got discouraged in the legislature, to go out in the parking lot and look up at the Capitol and just realize you're one of only a few hundred people that have ever been able to do this in the history of the United States, right? So for Illinois. But I remember being there and realizing that I was taking the oath of office. And I told you, I take my word very seriously. So when you're pledging to uphold the Constitution of Illinois and the Constitution of the United States, it's why I get very passionate when I'm the assistant floor leader in the Senate, and I was the assistant floor leader in the House. When you're standing up and I'm saying to Don Harmon, how can you vote for this bill when you know that it's opposed to the Illinois Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and the oath that you took as an attorney? I'm not just saying that because it's good words to say, when you're debating something. I mean it. You're standing there taking the oath of office for the first time, and then you have to sign this oath. It is just unbelievable. And my mom was in the audience, and to just know that my children were there, my husband's there, and it's just awesome. I've made it a practice now I have 6 grandkids, and so the oldest will graduate from Mount Vernon High School this year. Each of the girls, so I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old who are girls, they both got to come to Springfield when they turned 8 to be my page for a day. I have twin grandsons that are now 10. When they were 8, they couldn't come because we were in COVID. So we're now starting to allow some guests back on the Senate floor. So the twin boys are coming this year, one at the beginning of April, one at the end of April, because I like to bring them in separately. We go to dinner. I take them to a really nice restaurant, so they have to wear their suit and have their suits on the Senate floor. So the pride that I feel for my family. I have 2 other twin grandsons also, so we have 2 sets of twin grandsons.
Wow.
We call them the twins and the mini twins. The mini twins are our sons, and they're just 2. So I hope to be in office long enough to take them when they turn 8 years old to do this. But just being there and realizing that even though you're sworn in the House, you're sworn in over at the University of Illinois Springfield. So you're not in the Capitol building. And we are not in the same Capitol building that Abraham Lincoln it was in. But you're serving in the same legislative body that Abraham Lincoln served in, that you just don't get over that, you know? And I tell the kids who come up and page, when I stand up in the House or in the Senate and introduce them, that's going into the legislative transcript for that day. It's there for all the rest of time. And they could come back in 50 years and read that day's transcript to their grandkids, and their name will be in the same legislative documents that Abraham Lincoln was in as our first Republican president, right? So it's an awesome honor. It's a deep honor, and I take it very seriously.
Well, couple concluding questions then.
Sure.
First, and I find this interesting to ask this, but what is something that you think people don't understand about you or that gets misrepresented?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm actually in the middle of something right now, but I think what gets misrepresented is I am a very conservative. You know me well. I'm a very conservative, deeply faith-filled evangelical Christian, Republican to my core. I also often say I bleed Republican red, but I am a deep believer in representative government. And so in my early years in the House, I had a district that even though on paper it looked like it was 52% Republican, that's a lot of state employees in there. And sometimes state employees can be a little bit fickle with their politics. And so I was asked quite often to vote in ways that would not now, when people look back, they might not look ultra-Republican. I never violate my faith. I will not take a vote that violates a biblical, anything biblical. I'm pro-life without exception. I believe in the biblical definition of marriage. I believe that men are men and women are women. And so when you look back at some of my voting record, it would be things like voting for the income tax increase. I own that vote. I don't run away from it. I voted to increase the motor fuel tax. That's a fact. I voted for the income tax increase because many people don't realize that when we voted on that right at January 1, we had been told by the bond rating there's 3 bond rating companies in the United States, all 3 of them, that if we didn't have a budget in place by the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange, that we would go into junk bond status. When you're in junk bond status, you can no longer borrow money. You can't borrow money as a state. And so that would mean that there would be no way for us to have gotten out of the $16.5 billion budget hole that we had gotten into, where, and they would have pulled our accreditation for all the public universities and colleges throughout the state. So all of the people who are at SIU, they could have taken that degree and used it for toilet paper because their degree would have meant nothing. It would not have been accredited schools. All of that was going to happen within about a 24-hour period. State employees, some state employees, if they're listening, will remember back in the early 90s when there was an issue with paying state employees and they were all going to get vouchers instead of their paycheck. And you would have had to take your voucher to Kroger's and say, can I use my IOU to buy my groceries? State employees would have gotten vouchers in their July 15th pay. So we were 2 weeks away from state employees not being paid. That is not who we are. So in Southern Illinois, basically we were getting to a point with no dental care, no medical care, chiropractors going out of business, leaving the state, dentists, doctors, so forth. So I still believe that that was the right vote. Overnight, we went from $16.5 billion in debt to $6 billion because we paid off. We were able to borrow at a lower rate on some of the bonds. I'm not going to get into all the details. But then on the motor fuel tax, unfortunately, Illinois funds its roads through the motor fuel tax. So part of the decision that was made by Republicans who voted to increase the motor fuel tax was that vote could not be taken until we had the lockbox in place to make sure that the government could never sweep road funds again. Once that box was in place, then it became an issue of, do we believe that our roads and bridges should be fixed? So for instance, I believe it was 75% of all the bridges in Illinois had to be completely replaced within the next 10 years before that vote, or after that vote, sorry. And so then it became, do I want us to have safe roads and bridges for our families, for our children, for our grandchildren, or not? I don't buy my gas out of state unless I'm on an out-of-state trip. I don't go over to Missouri. You know, my district goes from Missouri to Indiana. I don't drive over to Indiana and get my gas. I don't go down to Kentucky. I don't go over to Missouri. I voted for it. I pay for the gas here. So I would say to folks, I hate it. I hate that that's how we fund our roads and bridges, but it is how we fund them. And so I would say to people, look at my voting record while I've been in the Senate. My voting record is the same as Darren Bailey's. My voting record is the same as Jason Plummer's. So when you're looking at who's conservative and who isn't, then you have to kind of take into context, what was that person's district when they were voting that way? At the time that I voted for some of these issues, I was in a 50-50 district, basically. But I never vote against my faith. So I would like for people to just know that. And then if they choose to not have me as their senator anymore, well, I can live with that. But I try to do the right thing every day. I've raised my kids, and I said this to inmates when I worked in corrections. This is one of the things that I live by. Do the right thing for the right reason every time, and God will bless you. And so when I'm going to take a hard vote on a particular issue, I came home before I voted on that income tax increase. We were supposed to stay in Springfield. I came home. I got home about 10 o'clock at night. I'd been fasting for 3 days. I prayed all night about it. I got up the next morning, showered, changed my clothes, and went back to Springfield. And I remember another legislator who was going to vote for it said to me, "Are you still okay on this vote today?" And I said to her, "I don't care if anybody else votes for this today. I believe that this is the right thing to do, and no matter what anyone else does, I'll be voting yes on this bill today." So, it's easy to get up and go to work every day and take some of the beat down that you get for some votes when you believe in your heart of hearts that it's the right thing to do. And so I will continue to serve the people of the 58th Senate District for as long as they let me do that, and I will do it this way. And so when they no longer appreciate that or like that, they'll let me know, and someone else will go in. Or if God directs me to do something different in my life, then I'll leave office, and I'll leave it understanding that I fulfilled the mission that God sent me on for that, and that's how I try to live my life.
Well, Senator Bryant, thank you for your time. Thank you for I didn't have to guide you much. You were very good at laying everything out, but I hope everybody who listened has a better feel for who you are as a person. That's the intent here, and I appreciate what you do for Southern Illinois, and thank you for being on.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks to everyone who's listening for giving me the distinct honor and privilege of representing them in Springfield.
Thank you.
Thank you.